It was the night before Thanksgiving. Manhattan lights glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Park Avenue apartment, reflecting in a half-empty glass of Merlot. Emily Carter stood in the kitchen, wearing her worn gray sweater, waiting for her husband to come home. The roast turkey sat untouched, the candles burned too low. The city hummed outside, unaware that inside, her world was about to collapse. The clock struck 9. She heard laughter in the hallway, his laughter, followed by a woman's giggle. Her hands trembled as she walked toward the door. When Daniel Miller stepped in, he wasn't alone. Beside him was Vanessa Brooks, a young woman with flawless makeup, wearing a silver dress that shimmered under the warm light. Emily froze. "Emily," Daniel said, his tone casual, almost bored. "This is Vanessa. She's a colleague." The word colleague sliced through the air like broken glass. Emily's eyes darted to the lipstick smudge on his collar. The scent of expensive Dior perfume hung heavy in the room. She whispered, "You brought her here?" Daniel poured himself a drink, pretending not to hear. Vanessa gave a polite, condescending smile and ran her fingers through Daniel's hair. "He said you make the best cranberry pie," she said sweetly. Emily's heart cracked. She walked to the dining table, staring at the 2 empty plates she'd set hours earlier. The Thanksgiving meal she had spent all day cooking now felt like a cruel joke. "You could have at least told me," she said quietly. Daniel shrugged, swirling his drink. "Told you what? That I finally found someone who understands me?" Her breath hitched. "After everything we built? The years I worked to help you climb? The nights I waited while you closed deals?" He cut her off sharply. "Don't make this dramatic, Emily. You've always been too emotional. That's why we drifted apart." The words stabbed deeper than any betrayal. She looked at him, at the man she once thought she'd grow old with, and realized she didn't recognize him anymore. The ambition that once drove him had turned cold, metallic, cruel. Vanessa glanced around the apartment, clearly impressed. "Such a lovely place," she said. "Daniel says you decorated it. You have taste." Emily forced a smile. "I used to." She picked up her wedding photo from the shelf, the two of them laughing under the autumn leaves in Central Park, and placed it gently into a drawer. Her hands were steady now, but her voice trembled. "I think you should both go." Daniel laughed softly, almost mockingly. "You'll be fine, Emily. You always are." He reached for his coat, leaving behind the faint sound of ice clinking in his glass. Vanessa followed, her heels clicking on the marble floor. The door closed. Silence filled the apartment. The turkey had gone cold. The candles had melted into nothing. Emily sank to the floor, her reflection shimmering on the polished surface. She whispered to the empty room, "Happy Thanksgiving, Daniel." A single tear rolled down her cheek and landed beside her wedding ring, which had slipped off her finger. She looked at it, the diamond catching the last glimmer of city light, and for the first time didn't reach to pick it up. The ring lay there, a symbol of everything she had given and everything he had thrown away. Outside, snow began to fall over Manhattan. Inside, Emily made a silent promise to herself. She would not break. Not tonight. Not ever again. She didn't know it yet, but 1 year later she would return to that same world in a limousine, wearing diamonds brighter than his regrets. The morning sun barely touched the skyline of Brooklyn when Emily Carter signed the divorce papers. Her hands shook slightly, the pen leaving a faint tremor in her signature. The lawyer's office smelled of old paper and burnt coffee, the kind that lingers long after a meeting ends. It took only seconds for a decade of marriage to be reduced to ink and silence. Outside, the winter air cut through her coat as she walked down the steps. She held the manila envelope close, as if it could still keep her warm. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a message from Daniel's attorney confirming the settlement. She would get the small car, a modest monthly allowance, and nothing else. The Park Avenue apartment, the savings, the investments, all gone. Her cab drove past the skyline where they once dreamed together. The towers of Manhattan looked sharp and indifferent, like Daniel himself. She remembered the nights he came home late, reeking of whiskey and ambition, mumbling about building a future. It turned out that future didn't include her. Back at her tiny apartment in Brooklyn, the radiator hissed loudly, fighting the cold. Boxes lined the walls, half-unpacked memories. Their wedding photo lay face down on the counter. Emily sank onto the couch and stared at the ceiling. She wanted to cry, but the tears had already run dry. Her phone buzzed again. A message flashed on the cracked screen. Daniel's getting married next month, to Vanessa. It was from an old colleague who still worked at Daniel's firm. For a moment she couldn't breathe. Her stomach twisted. The room seemed to spin. He hadn't even waited a season to replace her. Her fingers hovered over the phone, trembling between rage and disbelief. She scrolled through social media and found it, a glossy engagement photo of Daniel and Vanessa, smiling in front of the Ritz-Carlton, champagne glasses in hand. His caption read, "Sometimes you have to lose something good to find something perfect." Thousands of likes, hundreds of comments, people congratulating him. No one knew what he'd done to get there. Emily turned off the phone and sat in silence. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and her own heartbeat echoing in her chest. She whispered to herself, "Perfect? We'll see." That night, she opened her laptop, the same old MacBook she'd used for freelance projects years ago. Maybe she could start working again. She searched job listings, scrolling endlessly through rejection after rejection. Every ad seemed to want 5 years of current experience or high-profile client references. She had neither. She brewed a cup of cheap coffee, its bitterness matching the taste in her mouth. Hours passed. Her inbox stayed empty. She clicked through her old portfolio, remembering the campaigns she'd helped build for Daniel's company, ideas he'd later taken credit for. Her phone buzzed once more, this time an email notification. The subject line read, "Remote marketing assistant needed, TechStart Innovations." She hesitated. The sender's name was unfamiliar, Richard Hayes. The listing was simple, freelance digital marketing support, flexible hours, remote work. It wasn't much, but it was something. She took a deep breath and started typing her response. Her words were honest, professional, but carried a quiet determination. "I may not have much, but I give my best to everything I touch." When she hit send, something inside her shifted. It wasn't hope exactly, more like a flicker of defiance. She stood by the window, looking out at the snow falling softly over Brooklyn. Somewhere in the city, Daniel and Vanessa were probably planning their glamorous wedding. Let them, she thought. Emily didn't know if her email would even be read. But deep down, she felt something stirring, a sense that maybe, just maybe, this was the first page of her comeback story. And just before midnight, her phone buzzed again. One new email. The sender, Richard Hayes. It was a bright California morning when the first photos appeared online. The news spread like wildfire. Daniel Miller marries model Vanessa Brooks in a lavish Beverly Hills ceremony. Emily Carter saw it all on her phone, sitting at the small kitchen table of her Brooklyn apartment. The screen glowed cold blue light against her tired face. She scrolled through the endless posts, crystal chandeliers, gold-trimmed tables, champagne fountains. Vanessa wore a glittering gown that hugged her perfect frame, smiling at Daniel like a trophy bride. He stood tall beside her, wearing a black tuxedo, his Rolex catching the sunlight. Every photo screamed success, luxury, and betrayal. Emily's hand tightened around her coffee mug. She could almost hear the fake laughter, the clicking cameras, the sound of Daniel's voice saying vows he once said to her. "In sickness and in health," she whispered bitterly. "You didn't even make it to the sickness part." She zoomed in on one picture, Daniel and Vanessa posing beside a Mercedes, the Ritz-Carlton Beverly Hills logo glowing behind them. He had written a caption, "New beginnings, thankful for love that feels effortless." Effortless. That word stung, because their love had been anything but effortless. Emily had stayed up late helping him build his presentations, rehearsing his speeches, making sure he looked like the man everyone admired. She had been his anchor while he climbed, and once he reached the top, he cut the rope. Her phone buzzed again, a reminder from her pregnancy app. "Week 7, your baby is the size of a blueberry." She froze. For days, she'd ignored the subtle nausea, the exhaustion, the lateness of her cycle. Now, it hit her like a storm. She dropped the phone, heart racing, her hand pressed against her stomach. No, it can't be. But the truth sat heavy inside her. She stumbled into the bathroom, rummaged through the cabinet for the box she had hidden away, a pregnancy test she'd bought just in case. She waited on the edge of the bathtub, counting the seconds as the line appeared. 1 minute, 2, then 3. Her eyes widened. 2 red lines, positive. Emily covered her mouth, shaking. 1,000 thoughts collided in her head. Anger, fear, disbelief, love. The man who abandoned her, humiliated her, was now celebrating a new marriage while she carried his child. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She wanted to scream, but instead she laughed, a quiet, broken laugh that echoed off the tiles. "Congratulations, Daniel," she whispered. "You left your wife pregnant." Outside, snowflakes drifted past the window. The world looked peaceful, almost mocking. Emily stared at her reflection in the mirror. Pale face, red eyes, messy hair, and saw someone she barely recognized. But beneath the exhaustion, there was a spark. Something fierce, something alive. She walked back to the kitchen, picked up her phone, and scrolled once more through Daniel's wedding photos. She paused at one where he was kissing Vanessa's forehead, the guests clapping behind them. Then she took a deep breath and whispered, "You have no idea what's coming." Her phone buzzed again, an email notification. It was from Richard Hayes, the CEO she had written to days earlier. The subject line read, "Interview scheduled, TechStart Innovations." Emily's breath caught. She stared at the screen, disbelief mixing with a sudden rush of adrenaline. The universe, it seemed, wasn't done with her yet. She wiped her tears, fixed her hair, and whispered to the quiet room, "Maybe this is where my story really begins." And as she looked at the positive test lying beside her phone, she realized her life wasn't falling apart. It was just changing direction. The test lay on the counter like a secret too heavy to hold. 2 bright red lines. Emily Carter stood frozen in her tiny Brooklyn bathroom, her pulse pounding in her ears. The world outside kept moving. Car horns, footsteps, laughter. But inside, time had stopped. She placed a trembling hand over her stomach, her breath shaky. "It's real," she whispered. "It's really happening." Her knees gave out. She slid to the cold tile floor, hugging herself as tears streamed down her cheeks. The reality hit harder than the betrayal itself. She wasn't just heartbroken now. She was carrying a piece of the man who broke her. For a long time, she just sat there, listening to the radiator hiss. She tried to picture Daniel's face if he knew. Would he even care? Would he see this as an inconvenience, or worse, a mistake? The thought made her chest ache. She forced herself to stand. The mirror reflected a pale, exhausted woman who looked older than 33. Her hair was tangled, her eyes red. But beneath that weariness, there was something new, a strange, quiet resolve. "You've been through worse," she told her reflection. "You'll survive this too." She walked to the kitchen, made a cup of instant oatmeal, and opened her laptop. Bills, medical insurance forms, job applications, her new daily routine. She typed "freelance marketing jobs remote" into the search bar. Dozens of listings popped up, each requiring more experience or connections than she had. The clock ticked past midnight. She was about to close her laptop when her email pinged. The subject line glowed, "Virtual interview confirmation, TechStart Innovations." Her heart skipped. She clicked it open. "Dear Miss Carter," it read, "we've reviewed your application and would like to schedule an interview for tomorrow, 10 a.m. Pacific Time. Best, Richard Hayes, CEO." She blinked. The CEO? Usually interviews came from HR assistants, not the man who ran the company. She looked up TechStart Innovations. It was a fast-growing Silicon Valley firm specializing in AI marketing software. Her pulse quickened. Maybe this was her one break. The next morning, she woke early, nausea twisting her stomach. She brushed her hair, put on a navy blouse, and set up her old MacBook on the small dining table. She practiced her smile in the screen reflection, trying to hide how terrified she felt. At exactly 10, the screen flickered, and there he was, Richard Hayes. Late 40s, calm gray eyes, the kind of presence that made silence feel comfortable. "Good morning, Emily," he said warmly. "Thank you for joining me." "Thank you for giving me the opportunity," she replied, forcing steady breath. They talked for nearly 30 minutes. He asked about her experience, her ideas, and how she handled challenges. Emily spoke honestly about creativity, persistence, and what it meant to rebuild from nothing. For the first time in months, someone listened. Not out of pity, but respect. When the call ended, Richard smiled. "I like your perspective," he said. "Let's work together." Emily stared at the blank screen after the call ended, her hand still over the touchpad. Did he just say yes? She whispered to herself, "I got the job." She leaned back in her chair, exhaling deeply. The world suddenly felt wider again, full of small possibilities. She looked at the pregnancy test still lying on the counter. It no longer symbolized fear. It was a reminder of strength, of survival. Emily took a deep breath and whispered, "It's you and me now, little one. We'll be okay." And that night, for the first time since the divorce, she slept without crying, completely unaware that this small freelance job would lead her to the man who'd change her life forever. The morning of her first interview with Techstart Innovations felt heavier than any before. Emily Carter sat at her small kitchen table in Brooklyn, sunlight filtering through dusty blinds. Her old MacBook hummed faintly, camera light blinking. Her palms were sweaty, but her voice had to sound calm. She had exactly one shot at this. She adjusted the screen, trying to hide the chipped paint on the wall behind her. A small vase of wilted daisies stood beside her laptop, a fragile attempt to make things look brighter. Her reflection on the screen revealed the faint tiredness under her eyes, the kind that no concealer could hide. Still, she straightened her back. At precisely 10 o'clock, the screen came alive. A man appeared, tall, well-dressed, with sharp features softened by a kind expression. "Good morning, Emily," he said. His voice was steady, confident, but warm. "I'm Richard Hayes, CEO of Techstart Innovations." For a second, she froze. Most CEOs didn't handle interviews themselves. She quickly smiled. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes. Thank you for meeting with me." "Please call me Richard," he said, smiling. "I've read through your portfolio. You've worked on impressive campaigns." Emily blinked. "You actually read my portfolio?" He laughed softly. "I like to know who I'm talking to. Numbers tell one story, but people tell another." His tone disarmed her. They spoke for 30 minutes about brand storytelling, digital outreach, and ethics in advertising. Emily shared her experiences from Daniel's firm without mentioning his name, how she'd built campaigns from scratch but never received credit. Richard listened, his expression thoughtful. "Integrity," he said finally, "is a rare currency in business. You seem to have plenty of it." Emily felt something shift inside her, validation she hadn't felt in years. She leaned forward. "I don't have a lot, but I give my best to everything I touch." He nodded slowly, impressed. "That's all I need to hear. Welcome to Techstart." Her breath caught. "Wait, you mean I'm hired?" Richard smiled. "Yes, you'll start part-time, remote. Let's see how you handle the first campaign. I have a feeling you'll do well." When the call ended, Emily sat frozen for a moment, staring at the screen. Then she exhaled, a trembling laugh escaping her lips. She'd done it. She had a job. That night, she worked late at the kitchen table, surrounded by notes and coffee mugs. The room smelled of rain and determination. She drafted ideas, researched brands, and built mock-ups. Hours passed unnoticed. Around midnight, an email pinged. "Nice work on your first draft. I can tell you think deeply about people. That's rare." It was from Richard. Emily smiled. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before she typed back. "Thank you. I'm just grateful for the chance." Minutes later, another message arrived. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Emily." She read it twice, warmth spreading through her chest. He didn't know her story, yet somehow he understood. Days turned into weeks. Her ideas impressed the team. Clients responded well. Richard occasionally sent her short notes, encouragement, advice, the kind of support she'd never received from Daniel. Each message reminded her she wasn't invisible anymore. But despite her growing confidence, mornings were hard. The nausea persisted. The weight of her secret pressed on her. She hadn't told Richard or anyone about the pregnancy. It wasn't shame, it was fear. Fear that she'd be judged, pitied, or dismissed before she could prove herself. Late one evening, while reviewing data reports, she whispered to the small bump beginning to show beneath her sweater, "We're doing this, baby. Just you and me." The city lights outside flickered, reflecting off her laptop screen. Somewhere in California, a man she barely knew had given her a lifeline. And though neither of them realized it yet, that connection, born out of chance, was about to become something far deeper than work. Winter settled over Brooklyn like a heavy blanket. The wind howled outside Emily Carter's apartment, rattling the windows and whispering through the cracks in the walls. Inside, her tiny space glowed with the pale blue light of her MacBook. The clock read 2:17 a.m., but she was still typing, her hands steady despite the exhaustion that clouded her mind. Empty coffee cups lined the table, their stale scent mixing with the faint sweetness of vanilla candles. She rubbed her temples, reviewing a digital marketing report for Techstart Innovations. Richard Hayes had trusted her with a major campaign. A chance to prove herself. And she refused to fail. Her pregnancy, now 3 months along, made everything harder. The nausea came in waves. Her back ached. Her feet swelled. Some days she barely had the energy to stand, but she worked anyway. Because work meant stability. Work meant survival. The city outside slept, but Emily didn't. She stared at her screen until her eyes blurred, adjusting graphics and rewriting taglines. Every click, every draft was another small rebellion against the life Daniel thought she couldn't rebuild. A notification blinked on her screen. New message, Richard Hayes. She hesitated, then opened it. Still awake? Emily smiled faintly, typing back, "Deadlines don't care that it's 2 a.m. Seconds later, his reply came. "You remind me of someone I used to know, someone who never gave up no matter what life threw at her." She hesitated, fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Did she make it?" she finally asked. Richard responded, "She did. She built an empire out of her pain." Emily leaned back in her chair, staring at the words. For the first time in months, she felt seen, not as a broken woman, not as someone to be pitied, but as someone capable of rising again. She closed her laptop and walked to the window. Snow was falling outside, covering the streets in quiet white. Her reflection stared back at her. Pale skin, tired eyes, hair loosely tied up. She whispered to the glass, "One day I'll make it too." The next morning, she woke to her alarm buzzing beside a half-eaten sandwich. Her stomach churned, and she barely made it to the sink before throwing up. She wiped her mouth, trembling. "Okay, baby," she said softly, one hand on her belly. "You and I just have to keep going." After a quick shower, she wrapped herself in a thick sweater and logged into another meeting. The TechStart team discussed analytics, budgets, and upcoming launches. She stayed silent most of the time, her camera off, her microphone muted. But Richard's voice carried through the speakers, calm and grounding. When the meeting ended, a private message popped up. "Emily, great work today. Don't overdo it. Health matters more than deadlines." Her throat tightened. No one had said words like that to her in a long time. That evening, she sat on the couch, sipping lukewarm tea, scrolling through her emails. The city lights shimmered outside her window, distant but comforting. She opened a book, Women Who Run with the Wolves, a gift Richard had recommended after one of their late-night talks. The words inside spoke of resilience, wild strength, and rebirth. She read until her eyes closed. The phone buzzed again at midnight. A simple message. "You're stronger than you think, Emily. Don't forget that." She stared at the screen, her heart swelling with something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. And as snow continued to fall outside, Emily didn't realize that every sleepless night, every word they exchanged was quietly building the foundation for something that would change both their lives forever. The first call came on a quiet Sunday morning. Snow still clung to the windowsill, and the faint hum of the radiator filled Emily Carter's apartment. She was curled on the couch under a blanket, one hand resting on her growing belly, when her phone buzzed beside her cup of cooling tea. The screen lit up with a name she hadn't expected, Richard Hayes. For a moment she hesitated. Her first instinct was that something had gone wrong with work, maybe a campaign issue or a missed deadline. She quickly brushed her hair behind her ear and answered, trying to sound professional. "Good morning, Richard." His voice came through warm and calm. "Morning, Emily. Sorry to bother you on a weekend. I just wanted to check in. How are you holding up?" The question caught her off guard. Not "how's the project" or "did you finish the report," but "how are you?" She stammered a bit. I'm fine, just catching up on rest." "I can tell you've been working too hard," he said, his tone half teasing, half serious. "I noticed your emails come through at 3 in the morning." She laughed softly. "Occupational hazard." There was a pause, comfortable, not awkward. Then he said quietly, "You know, work can wait sometimes. Life can't." Emily swallowed hard. No one had ever said something like that to her, not since before the divorce. Daniel used to scoff at the idea of taking breaks. Rest was weakness to him. But hearing those words from Richard felt different, gentle, sincere, and oddly grounding. They talked for a while about little things, New York winters, favorite books, even the smell of coffee shops she missed working from. At one point, Richard mentioned a title she hadn't heard before, Meditations, by Marcus Aurelius. "It's not just philosophy," he explained. "It's about finding peace when everything around you feels out of control. You might like it." Emily smiled faintly. I could use a little peace. Before hanging up, he said softly, You're doing great, Emily. You might not see it yet, but you're rebuilding your life one day at a time. The line clicked off, but his words lingered. She sat there in silence, her eyes stinging. She wasn't sure why. Maybe because someone finally saw her not as broken, but as someone becoming whole again. Over the next few weeks, their calls became a quiet ritual. Sometimes about work, sometimes not. He'd ask how she was feeling, if she'd eaten, if the nausea had eased. She still hadn't told him she was pregnant. She didn't know how. Not yet. One night, during a late video meeting, Richard noticed her pale face. You look exhausted, he said gently. You should rest. She tried to laugh it off. I'm fine, just didn't sleep much. He studied her through the screen. Emily, you don't need to prove anything to anyone. You've already done enough. Her throat tightened. For a moment, she couldn't speak. After the call ended, she sat staring at her reflection in the dark laptop screen. The city outside glowed like 1,000 tiny stars. She whispered, Why does he care? Later that week, a package arrived at her door. Inside was a Kindle and a note written in neat handwriting. You mentioned you can't sleep. I thought reading might help. Try the book we talked about, RH. She traced the initials with her fingertips, a small smile tugging at her lips. He didn't know her full story, but somehow he was already part of it. She turned on the Kindle, the words of meditations filling the screen. The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. She exhaled slowly. For the first time in a long time, her thoughts felt like they might finally lead somewhere good. And that night, as she read under the glow of her bedside lamp, she didn't know that the man on the other end of those gentle calls would soon become the one holding her hand through the hardest night of her life. The invitation came on a gray Friday morning, tucked between client emails and campaign updates. Emily Carter had just finished reviewing a TechStart presentation when she noticed Richard Hayes's name in her inbox. The subject line read, A change of scenery? Curious, she clicked. The message was short but warm. You've worked hard these past months, Emily. Sometimes the best ideas come when we step away from the noise. I'm hosting a small strategy retreat in California next week. I'd love for you to join us. Everything's covered. Say yes if you can. Her first instinct was panic. California? She hadn't left New York in over a year. The thought of flying, of facing strangers, of stepping into the same air as the man who'd become the quiet anchor in her life, it all felt surreal. But something inside her whispered, Go. She stared at her reflection in the window. The faint curve of her belly was now visible beneath her sweater. She traced it gently and whispered, We're okay, little one. Maybe this is what we need. That night, she booked the flight. When the plane touched down in San Francisco, sunlight flooded through the windows. The air smelled different, warmer, calmer, touched with salt from the nearby bay. Emily stepped out in her navy coat, clutching her small suitcase. She had no idea what to expect. A black Mercedes waited at the curb. The driver held up a sign, Miss Carter. Inside, soft jazz played. Through the tinted window, the hills of Silicon Valley rolled by. Modern glass buildings, vineyards, distant mountains. Her phone buzzed, a text from Richard, looking forward to finally meeting you in person. Her heart skipped. The car turned into a long driveway lined with olive trees. At the end stood a modern house perched on a hill, all glass and light, overlooking the Pacific. It wasn't ostentatious. It was peaceful, elegant, like everything about him. The door opened before she reached it. Richard stood there, casual in a white shirt and dark jeans, holding a bouquet of white lilies. His smile was genuine, unpracticed. Welcome to California, Emily. For a moment, she forgot how to breathe. He looked exactly as she'd imagined, and nothing like it. There was kindness in his eyes, but also something deeper, something that felt safe. Thank you for inviting me, she managed. This place is breathtaking. He handed her the flowers. You deserve a view that reminds you life can still be beautiful. Inside, the house smelled faintly of cedar and ocean air. Sunlight streamed through glass walls, bouncing off shelves lined with books. Some titles she recognized: Meditations, The 48 Laws of Power, Women Who Run with the Wolves. They talked for hours over dinner, sharing stories not just about work, but about loss, regret, and the fragile ways people heal. Richard told her about his late wife, gone too soon from illness. Emily listened, her heart aching with empathy. When he spoke of rebuilding his company from grief, she understood more than words could say. And when she finally told him, hesitantly, trembling, that she was pregnant, his expression didn't change. He simply nodded and said, "Then you're even stronger than I thought." The words undid her. Tears welled up, not from sadness but from relief. No judgment, no pity, just understanding. Later, as they stood on the terrace, the Pacific stretched endlessly before them, the horizon burning gold in the sunset. Richard turned to her and said quietly, "You know, sometimes life takes everything away only to give you back something truer." She looked out at the ocean, the wind lifting her hair, and whispered, "Maybe this is my something truer." And as night fell over the California coast, neither of them realized that this trip, this quiet, unexpected crossing of paths, had already begun to change both their destinies forever. The evening air in California was soft and cool, carrying the faint scent of jasmine from the garden. Emily Carter sat on the terrace of Richard Hayes's glass-walled home, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea as the Pacific shimmered under the fading sun. The waves crashed below the cliffs like a slow heartbeat. For the first time in years, she felt still. Richard emerged from the kitchen, setting down 2 plates of grilled salmon and roasted vegetables. "I hope you like simple food," he said. "I don't believe in pretending sophistication through flavor," she smiled. "After what I've been through, simple sounds perfect." They ate slowly, the silence between them comfortable. Emily had spent the entire day with Richard's team at the retreat, sharing ideas, brainstorming, laughing more than she had in months. The employees respected her, not because of her past or her pain, but because she had value. It was a feeling she'd forgotten existed. Now, under the string lights draped across the patio, she allowed herself to exhale. Richard studied her for a moment. "You know," he said gently, "you work as if you're trying to prove something. Who are you proving it to?" The question struck deep. She looked down at her plate, her voice barely above a whisper. "To myself, maybe, or to the man who made me believe I wasn't enough." Richard leaned back, expression thoughtful. "Someone's opinion of you doesn't define your truth, Emily. It just reveals their blindness." She blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears. "You talk like you've been through something similar." "I have," he said softly. "When my wife passed away, people stopped seeing me as a man. They saw a broken story. But grief doesn't erase worth. It refines it." His words settled between them, heavy but comforting. Emily felt warmth rise in her chest, a quiet understanding that didn't need more explanation. After dinner, they walked along the path leading down to the edge of the property, where the ocean breeze swept their hair and carried away the remnants of their pain. Richard stopped near the railing, watching the waves. "I built this house after she died," he said. "I told myself it would be a place of peace, but it felt empty, until tonight." Emily's throat tightened. She didn't know what to say. She'd been invisible for so long that kindness felt foreign. She turned toward him, her voice soft. "You don't have to say that." He looked at her then, really looked into the quiet strength behind her eyes, the layers of heartbreak and resilience. "I'm not saying it to be kind," he replied. "I'm saying it because it's true." The wind lifted her hair, and for a fleeting second, she let herself imagine a world where she wasn't the woman left behind, but the woman who survived. They stood there in silence, the ocean's rhythm filling the spaces words couldn't. When she finally spoke, it was barely a whisper. "I forgot what it felt like to be seen." Richard reached out, not to touch, but to offer presence. "Then start remembering," he said. The stars began to appear, one by one, over the darkening sky. She could hear the faint clink of glasses from the house behind them, the sound of laughter from his team inside. But out here, it was just the two of them. 2 souls who had lost everything once, now finding something quietly new. As they walked back toward the house, Richard opened the door for her, his hand brushing the frame. "I hope you let yourself be loved again someday, Emily," he said, his tone almost a whisper. Her heart raced. She didn't respond. She couldn't. But when she looked at him one last time that night, something in her eyes said everything her lips couldn't. And as she lay awake later in the guest room, listening to the ocean outside, Emily knew one thing for certain. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of what came next. Exactly 1 year after her life fell apart, Emily Carter woke to the soft hum of her alarm and the golden light of dawn spilling through her apartment. The Brooklyn skyline shimmered outside her window, calm and distant. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, another message from Richard Hayes. "Good morning, Emily. The Thanksgiving gala at the Ritz-Carlton is next week. I'd be honored if you'd join me." Her fingers hovered over the screen. She'd heard about the event. It was one of the most exclusive gatherings of New York's elite. CEOs, investors, socialites, politicians. The kind of place she never imagined being invited to again. Especially not after Daniel's betrayal. She reread the message, her heart pounding. Was she ready for that world again? Ready to stand in the same room as the man who'd once destroyed her? Then she remembered Richard's words from months before. "You're stronger than you think." She typed back simply, "I'll be there." The week passed in a blur of meetings and quiet evenings. Emily had officially joined TechStart's executive communications team. Richard's personal recommendation had made it possible. Her work was thriving. She had purpose again. Yet beneath the success was a quiet storm of nerves. The night before the gala, she sat at her vanity, brushing her hair, staring at her reflection. Her body had changed. Her belly was round and graceful beneath her silk robe. She touched it gently. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" she whispered. A knock on the door startled her. When she opened it, a delivery man handed her a large white box tied with a satin ribbon. The note on top read, "Every strong woman deserves to shine, R.H." Inside was the most beautiful gown she had ever seen, pale champagne silk with tiny diamonds embroidered along the waist, shimmering under the light. She pressed her hand to her mouth, tears welling. The dress wasn't just expensive, it was symbolic. It was proof that someone finally saw her worth. Thanksgiving night arrived cold and clear. The limousine waited at the curb, engine humming softly. Emily stepped outside in her diamond dress, her hair in loose waves, a simple Tiffany bracelet glinting at her wrist. The city lights reflected off the snow-dusted streets as she took a deep breath and climbed inside. Her heart raced as the car crossed the bridge into Manhattan. The skyline stretched before her like a memory she'd finally reclaimed. She wasn't the same woman who had left that city broken. She was returning with dignity, purpose, and quiet strength. The limousine stopped in front of the Ritz-Carlton. Cameras flashed as guests stepped out in designer gowns and tuxedos. A red carpet stretched across the entrance. Emily smoothed her dress and waited for the door to open. Richard stepped out first, offering his hand. "You look incredible," he said, his voice low but sincere. She smiled softly. "You clean up well yourself, Mr. Hayes." He laughed, helping her out of the car. The crowd turned as they walked in, whispers trailing behind them. Heads turned, eyes widened. Even among the glittering elite, Emily stood out. Not because of her beauty, but because of her poise. Inside, chandeliers sparkled overhead, violins played softly, and the scent of roses and champagne filled the air. Emily felt every gaze on her, but instead of fear, she felt calm. Richard leaned closer. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone tonight," he whispered. "Just be." She nodded, her pulse steady now. The music swelled as they entered the grand ballroom, and she felt it, the shift, the quiet power of her own rebirth. What she didn't know was that, across the room, Daniel Miller had just turned. And frozen in disbelief at the sight of the woman he once threw away, now glowing brighter than ever. The morning before the Thanksgiving gala, the city felt alive in a way Emily Carter hadn't felt in years. The crisp Manhattan air was cold but clear, the kind that smelled faintly of roasted chestnuts and ambition. As she stepped out of the black Mercedes that Richard had sent, the doorman of Tiffany & Co. greeted her with a nod. Inside, everything glowed. Crystal lights shimmered off rows of glass cases, filled with diamonds, pearls, and silver. The air smelled faintly of vanilla and money. Emily hesitated at the entrance, fingers brushing the small bump beneath her wool coat. She'd never been inside Tiffany's before. Not as a customer. "Good morning, Miss Carter," a sales associate greeted warmly. "Mr. Hayes called ahead. We've been expecting you." She blinked. "He did?" "Yes," the woman smiled. "He said you should choose whatever makes you feel unstoppable." Emily laughed softly, shaking her head. That was such a Richard thing to say. She followed the associate through the aisles until they stopped at a glass display. Inside was a gown unlike anything she'd ever seen. champagne-colored silk, embroidered with soft diamonds along the neckline and waist. Next to it, a delicate pair of crystal earrings caught the light like falling snow. Her voice faltered. "It's beautiful." The woman nodded. "Mr. Hayes personally selected this for you, but he said it only becomes yours if you feel powerful wearing it." For a moment, Emily was speechless. She thought of the woman she'd been a year ago, crying on a kitchen floor, heart shattered, left with nothing but bills and shame. And now she was standing here, surrounded by glittering glass, about to attend the same world that once rejected her. She ran her fingers along the fabric, feeling its smoothness. "I think," she whispered, "it's time." The fitting room was a world of mirrors and soft light. When she stepped into the gown, it fit perfectly, almost as if it had been made for her body. The one she'd learned to accept again, the one that carried both scars and new life. She looked at herself in the mirror and didn't recognize the reflection. The woman staring back wasn't broken, she was radiant. Her shoulders were strong, her posture steady, her eyes alive with quiet fire. For a long moment, she simply stared. Then she smiled. When she stepped out of the fitting room, the staff fell silent. Even the associate who'd seen hundreds of fittings stood in awe. "You look," she started, then shook her head. "Like you own the room." Emily laughed, embarrassed but glowing. "Thank you." The associate handed her a small blue box tied with a white ribbon. "A gift from Mr. Hayes," she said. He insisted. Inside was a diamond pendant, simple, elegant, timeless. Attached was a handwritten note. "This isn't about what you wear, Emily. It's about remembering who you've always been." Her throat tightened. She clasped the necklace around her neck and whispered, "Thank you, Richard." As she left the store, she caught her reflection in the glass doors. Snow had begun to fall again, flakes glimmering under the city lights. The limousine waited at the curb, the driver holding the door open. She stepped inside, smoothing the skirt of her gown. The world outside blurred as they drove uptown. For once, Emily didn't feel like a passenger in someone else's story. She was driving her own. When her phone buzzed, she smiled before even reading the name. "Richard Hayes. You ready for tonight?" She typed back, "More than ever." And as the car sped toward the Ritz-Carlton, Emily Carter didn't just feel beautiful. She felt untouchable. What she didn't know was that the man who once shattered her was about to see exactly what he'd lost forever. The night air outside the Ritz-Carlton was electric, alive with the hum of engines, flashes of cameras, and the murmur of New York's elite gathering for the Thanksgiving gala. Photographers lined the red carpet, their lenses glinting like stars. Laughter echoed off marble walls, mingling with the sound of champagne corks and jazz drifting from inside. A sleek black limousine slowed to a stop at the hotel entrance. Reporters glanced up, ready for another celebrity arrival. But when the driver stepped out and opened the door, the air seemed to shift. First came the shimmer, the faint reflection of diamonds catching the city lights. Then came her. Emily Carter stepped gracefully from the car, one hand resting lightly on the door, the other clutching a small silver clutch. The crowd fell silent for a breath, then erupted into whispers. Cameras clicked furiously. She looked breathtaking, poised, glowing, every inch of her exuding calm power. The champagne silk of her gown sparkled with diamond embroidery that caught every flash, her hair loose in soft waves, her eyes steady. The Tiffany pendant at her neck shimmered just enough to hint elegance without arrogance. Behind her, Richard Hayes exited the limousine, his tailored black tuxedo perfectly fitted. He walked around to her side and offered his arm. She took it without hesitation. Together, they were magnetic, class and strength in perfect balance. As they stepped onto the red carpet, the flashes intensified. A reporter called out, "Mr. Hayes, who's the stunning woman with you?" Richard smiled faintly. "Someone the world should have noticed long ago." Emily's cheeks warmed, but she held her composure. Every instinct told her not to shrink. Not tonight. Not after everything. The doorman opened the grand glass doors and the couple entered the golden light of the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Waiters moved between guests carrying trays of champagne. The hum of conversation paused briefly as people turned to look. Whispers spread quickly. "Is that Emily Carter? Wasn't she Daniel Miller's ex-wife? Who's she with now?" Emily heard every murmur but didn't flinch. She had imagined this moment for months, not for revenge, but for closure. to walk into the same world that once pitied her, now as a woman no longer defined by pain. Richard leaned in slightly, his voice low. "You okay?" She nodded, smiling softly. "Better than I've ever been." They made their way toward the reception hall, where the city's most powerful names were gathered. At the center table, surrounded by business associates, reporters and socialites, sat Daniel Miller. He was mid-laugh, a glass of scotch in hand, his new wife Vanessa seated beside him in a gold gown far too glittery for taste. But when his eyes lifted and found Emily across the room, the laughter died instantly. His face paled. The glass froze halfway to his lips. Emily's steps didn't falter. She walked with quiet grace, every movement deliberate. The lights from the chandeliers caught her gown and made it sparkle like starlight. Richard guided her toward a nearby group of investors, shaking hands, introducing her with confidence. Daniel couldn't look away. The woman he'd once mocked for being too emotional, the one he'd abandoned without a thought, now stood radiant and untouchable. The sight of her beside a billionaire made something inside him twist. Vanessa leaned in, whispering, "Who's she?" He swallowed hard. "No one," he muttered, but the lie hung heavy. From across the room, Emily turned her head just slightly, just enough for their eyes to meet. For a split second, the noise around them faded. No anger, no tears, just quiet power. Her gaze said everything. "You thought I'd disappear. You were wrong." She smiled faintly, then turned back to Richard, laughing softly at something he said. And in that single moment, Daniel realized the cruelest truth of all. She didn't need revenge. Her success was the loudest silence he'd ever heard. The ballroom glowed beneath the chandeliers, their light scattering across the marble like shards of gold. Conversations hummed, champagne glasses clinked, and somewhere near the stage, a jazz trio played a slow, velvety tune. The Thanksgiving gala at the Ritz-Carlton was in full swing, until the moment Emily Carter walked in. Every head turned. Whispers followed her like perfume. She didn't need to announce herself. Her presence did it for her. She moved gracefully, the diamonds on her dress catching each flicker of light. Beside her, Richard Hayes carried an effortless authority, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. Together, they looked like a power couple carved from quiet confidence. Daniel Miller, seated at the center of the VIP table, didn't notice her at first. He was laughing too loudly at a joke from one of his board members, his ego as inflated as the bubbles in his champagne flute. But then he heard a murmur, a tone in the crowd that pulled his attention. He turned and froze. The laughter died in his throat. His eyes widened as if he were seeing a ghost. Emily stood only 20 feet away, radiant and composed, a living contradiction to every story he'd told about her after the divorce. For a moment, the noise around him dulled, replaced by the deafening thud of his heartbeat. Vanessa leaned over, her voice dripping curiosity. "Who is she?" Everyone staring. Daniel's jaw tightened. "No one important," he said quickly, though his voice betrayed him. But he couldn't stop watching. Emily met his gaze with quiet calm. There was no anger, no bitterness, just the kind of stillness that made him uncomfortable. She gave a polite nod, the faintest curve of a smile, and turned away as if he were nothing more than a stranger in a crowded room. That single gesture hit harder than any slap. Richard noticed the shift in her posture. "Someone you know?" he asked gently, offering her a glass of sparkling water. She hesitated, then took it with a small smile. "Someone I used to?" Across the room, Daniel's face burned. The man beside her, he knew that face. Richard Hayes, the tech billionaire whose innovations had been all over CNBC, a man whose net worth dwarfed his own. The realization landed like a punch. Emily wasn't just surviving, she was standing next to power that made Daniels look small. Vanessa, oblivious, whispered, "She's beautiful, isn't she?" Daniel snapped, "Don't start." The tension between them drew curious glances from their table. But Daniel didn't care. His thoughts spiraled, dragging him backward, to the nights Emily had begged him to come home earlier, to the mornings she'd packed his suits, ironed his shirts, supported his ambitions without complaint. He had left her for youth, for vanity, for a woman who now checked her reflection more than she checked on him. He felt the walls closing in. Meanwhile, Richard guided Emily through the crowd, introducing her to executives and investors, proud as if she were already his equal. "This is Emily Carter," he said, "one of the sharpest minds on our communications team." Every handshake, Every compliment chipped another piece off the old identity she'd worn, the quiet, invisible wife. Tonight, she wasn't anyone's shadow. The band switched to a slow tune. Richard leaned closer. "You look like you could use some air. Want to step outside for a moment?" She nodded, grateful. As they walked toward the terrace, she felt Daniel's stare burning through her back, but she didn't turn around. She didn't need to. Outside, the night was cold and calm. Manhattan's skyline glowed beyond the glass. Emily exhaled, her breath visible in the air. Richard studied her for a moment. "He's here, isn't he?" She smiled faintly. "He saw me, that's enough." And inside, Daniel lifted another glass of scotch, pretending not to care. But every sip tasted like regret. The air inside the ballroom grew heavier the moment Daniel Miller stood up from his table. His jaw was tight, his drink untouched. Vanessa called after him, confused, but he didn't hear her. All he could see was Emily Carter, his ex-wife, glowing beneath the chandeliers like a living reminder of everything he'd thrown away. He crossed the floor slowly, weaving between clusters of socialites and investors. The murmur of the crowd dipped, curiosity replacing laughter. Emily, standing near the terrace doors beside Richard Hayes, noticed the movement before Richard did. Her pulse quickened, but she didn't move. Not this time. Daniel stopped just a few feet away, straightening his cufflinks as if that small act could hide his shaking hands. "Emily," he said finally, his voice low but edged with tension. "You look different." She turned to face him, calm, poised. People tend to change when they stop being underestimated. A few nearby guests turned, catching the sharpness in her tone. Richard's gaze flicked toward Daniel, his expression polite but guarded. "Good evening, Mr. Miller," he said evenly. Daniel gave a tight smile. "Mr. Hayes, of course. Quite the surprise seeing you here with my ex-wife." Emily caught the faint sneer in his voice, the same condescension that used to make her feel small. But tonight, it had no power. "We work together," she said. "Apparently, fate has a sense of humor." Daniel chuckled bitterly. "I see you've moved on rather quickly. Impressive. Most women would still be finding themselves." The comment landed like a blade. The nearby conversation faded entirely. Even the jazz band seemed quieter. Emily could feel every gaze turned toward her, waiting for her to crumble, to blush, to stammer like before. But she didn't. Instead, she smiled, slowly, confidently, and took a small step forward. "You're right, Daniel," she said softly. "I did find myself the moment you lost me." A sharp silence cut through the ballroom. Richard's lips curved in quiet admiration. Daniel blinked, unprepared for the blow. She continued, her voice steady. "You thought I was weak because I loved you, but loving someone doesn't make you weak. Staying kind in the face of cruelty, that's strength." Every word dripped with truth. A few people at nearby tables exchanged glances. Vanessa, still seated across the room, looked around in confusion as whispers spread like wildfire. Daniel's confidence faltered. "You think this," he gestured vaguely toward her gown, the pendant, the billionaire beside her, "makes you better than me?" Emily shook her head. "No, it just reminds me I was always enough. You just never noticed." Richard stepped closer, his calm presence a silent shield. "Mr. Miller," he said quietly, "perhaps tonight isn't the best time for personal discussions." Daniel's jaw flexed. He looked around and realized everyone was watching, the investors he'd been trying to impress, the colleagues he needed respect from. He forced a strained smile, but the damage was done. His carefully crafted image, the charming CFO, the man who had traded up, was crumbling in real time. Emily, sensing the moment, inclined her head slightly. "Enjoy your evening, Daniel." Her tone was polite, final. Then she turned to Richard, who extended his arm again without hesitation. She slipped her hand into his, and together they walked toward the ballroom's grand staircase, leaving behind the man who once believed she couldn't stand without him. The crowd parted as they passed. Some whispered admiration. Others simply stared. But Emily didn't look back. She didn't need to. Richard leaned close as they reached the staircase. "You handled that beautifully," he murmured. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders light. "For the first time in a long time, I didn't need to be angry. I just needed to be done." And as they ascended the steps beneath the glittering chandeliers, Daniel stood frozen in the crowd, realizing he'd just witnessed the one thing his money could never buy: grace. The morning after the Thanksgiving gala, Manhattan woke to headlines that sparkled brighter than the city's skyline. Emily Carter's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Notifications exploded across her screen. Emails, calls, social media tags. She rubbed her eyes, still half asleep, and reached for her phone on the nightstand. The first thing she saw was a photo. The photo. It was everywhere. Emily, radiant in her diamond gown, standing beside Richard Hayes, his hand resting lightly at her back as they shared an easy laugh beneath the Ritz-Carlton chandeliers. Someone had captured the perfect moment. Elegance, connection, power. The caption on one gossip account read, "Tech billionaire Richard Hayes seen with mystery woman at Thanksgiving gala." Another headline followed, "Who is Emily Carter? Sources say Hayes' new muse is a rising marketing executive." Her phone rang again, her friend Mia from Brooklyn. "Girl, you're trending." Emily sat up straight, shocked. "Trending? That's ridiculous." "I'm serious," Mia laughed breathlessly. "Diamond dresses all over Twitter. People are calling you the most elegant woman at the gala and—" Her tone shifted. "Daniel's name is all over the comments too. Everyone's realizing you're his ex-wife." Emily froze. The mention of Daniel's name sent a ripple through her stomach, but not fear. Closure. "Let them," she said quietly. "I didn't ask for attention. I just showed up." Meanwhile, across the city, Daniel Miller was having the worst morning of his life. He sat in his office at the investment firm, jaw clenched, scrolling through the same headlines. His assistant knocked, but he ignored her. Every article felt like a personal slap. CFO Daniel Miller's ex-wife makes stunning return to high society with a billionaire. The photo of Emily and Richard was on every business feed. Even the Wall Street Journal picked it up under the lifestyle column. Vanessa stormed into the room, waving her phone. "Why is everyone talking about your ex?" Daniel didn't answer. His mind raced. Investors would see this. Board members would whisper. It made him look small, disposable, outshined by the woman he'd once mocked for being ordinary. Vanessa slammed her phone on his desk. "Are you even listening to me?" he snapped. "Enough, Vanessa. It's just a photo." Her eyes flashed with anger. "No, it's not. People are saying she's the real reason Richard Hayes' company has been booming. They're calling her a genius. And you," she gestured at him with disgust. "You look like the fool who let her go." He didn't respond. He couldn't. Every word cut too close. Across town, Emily sat by the window with a cup of coffee, watching snow fall over the rooftops. Her phone buzzed again, this time a message from Richard. "You handled last night perfectly. Ignore the noise. The world's just discovering what I already know." She smiled softly, her fingers hovering over the keyboard before replying, "Thank you for everything." His response came instantly. "You earned it. Let's focus on the campaign. The press will move on." But deep down, she knew this moment meant more. It wasn't about fame or headlines. It was about transformation. The woman who once cried alone on a cold kitchen floor was now being recognized not for the man she married, but for the woman she became. As the day went on, major outlets reached out for interviews. Clients wanted meetings. Even Techstart's board praised her work. But Emily stayed quiet, declining interviews politely. She didn't need validation from strangers. That evening, she opened her laptop and saw one last headline trending. "Grace after betrayal, the woman who redefined strength." She smiled to herself, whispering, "They finally see me." And across Manhattan, Daniel watched the same headline glowing on his office screen, realizing too late that the woman he once tried to humiliate had just become the symbol of everything he could never buy: respect. The sky over Manhattan was gray, heavy with the threat of snow. Inside the glass tower of Miller & Co., Daniel paced his office like a man trapped. The headlines hadn't stopped. Every financial blog, every gossip column, every social media feed, Emily's name was everywhere. The woman he had divorced like a bad investment had become a symbol of elegance and rebirth. His phone buzzed again. Another notification. Public reacts to Emily Carter's transformation. Ex-husband Daniel Miller remains silent. Silent? He wasn't silent. He was boiling. The door burst open as Vanessa stormed in, her heels clicking angrily on the marble floor. "You should have seen what they're saying about you," she snapped. "They're calling you insecure, controlling, pathetic." Daniel glared at her. "Don't start, Vanessa. I have enough to deal with." She crossed her arms, eyes glinting with spite. "You humiliated her, Daniel. Now she's humiliating you without even trying. Maybe that's karma." He slammed his fist on the desk. You think I'm going to let her destroy my name? After everything I built? Vanessa smirked. You mean after everything she helped you build? That was the final straw. He grabbed his coat and stormed out, ignoring the whispers that followed him down the hall. He needed to see Emily, needed to control the narrative before it destroyed him completely. Hours later, Emily was in her apartment reviewing campaign analytics when a loud knock echoed through the door. She hesitated, her heart skipping. Few people knew where she lived. When she opened the door, Daniel stood there, disheveled, eyes bloodshot, his expensive coat wet from the sleet outside. "Daniel," she said flatly, "you shouldn't be here." He brushed past her before she could stop him, pacing the small living room. "I can't believe you'd do this," he said, voice rising. "You show up with that billionaire, act like you're some kind of saint, and now my reputation's falling apart." Emily crossed her arms, calm but cold. "I didn't do anything, Daniel. I just lived my life." He laughed bitterly. "You call this living? You turned the entire city against me." "You did that," she said softly. "You left me for someone who looked good on your arm. You mocked me. You lied. I didn't need to get revenge. You handed it to me yourself." He froze, his jaw tightening. "Do you have any idea what this is doing to me?" "Yes," she said. "It's called accountability." For a long moment, they stood in silence. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic outside. Then his tone shifted, pleading, almost desperate. "Emily, please. I'm asking you, don't let this go any further. The press is circling. Investors are nervous. You could clear things up. Say the photo was just business. Say we're still on good terms." Her eyes softened for just a moment, not from sympathy, but pity. "Daniel, you care more about your image than the truth. That's why you lost everything that mattered." He stepped closer, his voice breaking. "I made mistakes, I know that, but if you ever cared about me, just help me." Emily looked at him, truly looked. This man who once seemed untouchable now trembling under the weight of his own arrogance. "I did care," she said quietly. "That's why I'm not going to lie for you. You'll have to live with who you are." He stared at her, speechless. The silence between them was final. Emily opened the door, her voice calm. "Goodbye, Daniel." He lingered for a second, then walked out into the freezing night, the sound of his footsteps fading down the hall. She closed the door, exhaling deeply. For the first time, she felt nothing but peace. And as she turned back toward her laptop, another message from Richard appeared on the screen. "Big news tomorrow. Be ready." She smiled, unaware that Daniel's downfall had only just begun. By the next morning, the storm over Manhattan wasn't snow, it was scandal. News alerts flooded every screen, and Daniel Miller's name was plastered across every headline. Emily Carter hadn't said a word, but someone else had, and she hadn't just spoken. She detonated a bomb. Vanessa Brooks, the glamorous model Daniel had left Emily for, had gone public. It started with a single post on her verified social media account. A photo of her diamond wedding ring lying on a marble counter beside a torn envelope labeled Miller & Co. Confidential. The caption read, "I thought I married a man. Turns out I married a fraud." Within minutes, the internet exploded. Comments poured in, speculations spread like wildfire, and reporters swarmed Daniel's office before sunrise. Vanessa followed up with a video, tears streaking her makeup, her voice trembling but sharp. "He told me he loved honesty," she said to the camera, her tone bitter. "But the man who preaches integrity stole company money to pay for our wedding. He made me believe in a fairy tale built on lies." Across the city, Emily sat at her kitchen table, coffee untouched, staring at her phone. Her name wasn't mentioned, but she didn't need it to be. Every piece of the story tied back to Daniel, his affair, his arrogance, his fall. It was all coming full circle. Her phone buzzed again. Mia, her best friend, calling breathlessly. "Emily, turn on Channel 7, right now." She did. The news anchor's tone was grave. "CFO Daniel Miller is under investigation for the alleged misuse of corporate funds following accusations made by his wife, model Vanessa Brooks. Miller is expected to face the company's board later today." Emily exhaled slowly. It wasn't triumph she felt. It was release. Across the city, in a penthouse office that once symbolized his success, Daniel stood frozen. The blinds were half closed, but the flashes of reporters' cameras from the street below flickered through the gaps like lightning. His phone rang non-stop. Board members, lawyers, journalists. But he couldn't answer. Vanessa's words looped in his head. You married a fraud. He grabbed a glass of scotch, his hands shaking. The taste burned, but he needed it. He tried to call Vanessa, no answer. He tried to text her. Message not delivered. Finally, he hurled the glass across the room. It shattered. A spray of amber liquid and glass hitting the wall. Sir? His assistant's voice came through the intercom, timid. The board's waiting. Daniel straightened his tie, his reflection ghostly in the window. Tell them I'll be right in. He walked down the hall like a man marching toward a firing squad. The boardroom doors opened, revealing a table of cold faces. The chairman folded his hands. Mr. Miller, we've reviewed the evidence. It's extensive. We have no choice but to place you on immediate suspension pending investigation. Daniel's throat was dry. This is absurd, he argued. Vanessa's lying. She's angry. The chairman slid a folder across the table. Bank transfers, Daniel. Every dollar, every lie. He sank into his chair, words failing him. The room blurred. Hours later, as dusk fell, Emily received another message, this time from Richard Hayes. It's official. Miller & Co. has suspended Daniel pending full audit. Justice has a quiet way of finding balance. She stared at the message, then typed back, maybe some endings don't need revenge, they just need truth. Richard replied, truth always wins eventually. You just had to keep standing long enough to see it. Emily smiled faintly. Outside, the snow began to fall again. Soft, slow, forgiving. Somewhere across the city, Daniel stood alone in his dark office, the skyline he once ruled glowing beyond the glass. He had money still, maybe power for now, but his name, his pride, and the illusion of perfection were gone. And as Emily closed her laptop and turned off the news, she whispered to herself, it's over. But fate wasn't finished rewarding her yet. It was only clearing the path for what came next. The snow had stopped falling, leaving Manhattan wrapped in a quiet silver glow. Inside his Park Avenue apartment, Daniel Miller sat surrounded by half-packed boxes. The walls that once echoed with laughter, parties, and champagne toasts now hummed with silence. His reflection in the window looked older, sharper, tired. He hadn't slept in days. The board at Miller & Co. had voted unanimously, termination effective immediately. His accounts were frozen pending investigation. Even the Mercedes parked downstairs was being repossessed. The empire he'd built on ego was dissolving piece by piece. He looked down at his phone. No new messages. Vanessa had disappeared from the city, her modeling contract suspended, her image ruined alongside his. The last thing she'd sent him was a single line, we deserve each other's downfall. Daniel laughed bitterly, the sound hollow. Guess we do, he muttered. He poured himself another glass of scotch, though it no longer burned, it just numbed. The apartment door creaked as movers entered, boxing up his suits, his cufflinks, even the Mont Blanc pens he'd once bragged about owning. One of them paused. Sir, where should we put this? He asked, holding up a framed wedding photo. Daniel stared. It was him and Emily, smiling, young, hopeful. Central Park and autumn behind them. For a second he wanted to tell the mover to throw it away, but something in his chest tightened. Leave it, he said quietly. I'll take it. When they left, he sat alone with the picture. The memory hit harder than he expected. The way she used to look at him like he was her whole world. The way he used to believe that was enough. He whispered to the empty room, I was wrong, Emily. About everything. Across the city, Emily Carter sat in a sunlit cafe near Central Park, sipping a warm chai latte. She had just finished her latest project proposal for TechStart, a campaign that had already caught national attention. Her name was becoming known in the marketing world, not as someone's ex-wife, but as a rising creative force. Her phone buzzed, a message from Richard Hayes. Board approved your campaign. Outstanding work. Proud of you. She smiled, typing back, thank you for believing in me when no one else did. He replied instantly, you made it easy to believe. Her heart warmed. She looked out at the park, where the trees glistened with melting snow. For the first time in years, she wasn't looking back. Meanwhile, Daniel walked the same park hours later, coat pulled tight against the cold. He passed couples holding hands, families laughing, the faint smell of roasted almonds in the air. Everything felt distant, like a world he no longer belonged to. He found a bench, their bench, the same one where he'd once promised Emily forever. He sat down, pulling the photo from his coat pocket. The glass was cracked now, like the man holding it. Funny, he whispered, staring at their smiling faces. You were the one thing I got right. He sat there until dusk, when the city lights began to glow and the cold bit through his gloves. Finally, he stood, left the photo on the bench, and walked away. The wind caught it, carrying it a few inches before it landed face down in the snow. That night, Emily returned home, tired but content. She poured herself tea and looked at the soft glow of the city through her window. Somewhere out there, she knew Daniel's world was collapsing. But she didn't feel hate, only peace. She placed a hand on her belly, whispering, "We made it through the storm." And while Daniel watched his empire turn to dust, Emily realized she had already built something greater. Strength, love, and a future untouched by the ghosts of her past. The hospital room was quiet, except for the steady rhythm of the heart monitor and the faint hum of snowflakes brushing against the window. It was just after dawn, the sky tinted soft pink over Manhattan. Emily Carter lay back against the crisp white sheets, her breathing shallow but steady. Her hand gripped the edge of the blanket, her body trembling, not from pain, but from the storm of emotion flooding through her. Richard Hayes sat beside her, his sleeves rolled up, his hair slightly disheveled. He'd been there all night, since the first contraction, through every anxious moment. He hadn't left her side, not even once. His hand held hers firmly now, grounding her through the exhaustion. "You're doing amazing, Emily," he whispered, his voice calm but thick with emotion. "Just a little longer," she nodded weakly, tears in her eyes. "I never thought I'd make it here," she breathed. "Not like this." A nurse moved quickly between machines. "You're almost there, sweetheart," she said warmly. "One more push, okay? You've got this." And then, with a cry that seemed to shake the air itself, the baby arrived. For a moment, the world stopped. Then came the sound, the small, powerful wail of new life. The nurse smiled, lifting the tiny newborn into Emily's trembling arms. Emily stared down at the little boy, her lips trembling, her heart breaking open in ways she hadn't known were possible. His skin was warm, his cry fierce, his tiny fingers curling around her thumb. "Hi there," she whispered through tears. "Welcome to the world." Richard leaned over, his expression soft and unguarded. "He's perfect," he said quietly. Emily looked up at him, eyes glistening. "His name's Hope," she whispered. "Because that's all I had when everything fell apart." Richard smiled faintly, brushing a tear from her cheek. "Then Hope it is." For hours, they stayed there in quiet awe, the city waking slowly beyond the window. Emily couldn't stop staring at the baby, his soft breaths, the way his hand fit so easily into hers. Every ache, every heartbreak, every sleepless night suddenly made sense. Later, when the nurse took the baby for a checkup, Richard returned with a bouquet of white lilies, the same kind he'd greeted her with in California months earlier. "For the bravest woman I've ever met," he said, placing them beside her bed. Emily smiled, tired but glowing. "You've been my rock through all this, Richard. I don't even know how to thank you." He sat on the edge of the bed, his hand covering hers. "You don't need to thank me. You gave me something I thought I'd never feel again. Faith." Her eyes softened. "Faith in what?" "In people," he said simply. "In love that doesn't take more than it gives." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of his words hanging gently between them. Then Emily looked down at the baby's bassinet where Hope slept peacefully. "He's going to grow up knowing what love looks like," she said. Richard nodded. "Because his mother showed him first." Outside, the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, spilling gold across the hospital floor. Emily turned toward the light, feeling warmth spread through her chest. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel uncertain. It felt open. Her phone buzzed quietly on the table. A message from an unknown number flashed across the screen. "I heard about the baby. I'm glad you're okay, Daniel." Emily read it once, then set the phone down without replying. There was nothing left to say. She looked at her son, then at Richard, and smiled. "We're finally home," she whispered. And as the morning sun filled the room, Emily Carter realized the truth she had chased her whole life. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply happiness. 1 year later, the Plaza Hotel shimmered under the golden lights of another Thanksgiving gala. Snow dusted the marble steps outside, the sound of violins drifting through the glass doors. The city sparkled with celebration. But this year, the story was different. Inside the grand ballroom, Emily Carter stood near the stage, greeting guests with calm confidence. She wore a sleek white gown that seemed to glow under the chandeliers, her hair swept into soft curls. Around her neck gleamed the same Tiffany pendant Richard had given her a year ago, the one that once reminded her of survival, now a quiet symbol of triumph. She wasn't just attending tonight's gala. She was hosting it. After the chaos of the previous year, Richard Hayes had launched a new philanthropic branch of TechStart, focusing on helping women rebuild their lives after hardship. And when he asked who should lead it, there had been no hesitation. Emily Carter was now the director of communications and the face of the company's most successful initiative to date. Reporters mingled at the edges of the room, photographers snapping pictures as guests arrived. On every table sat elegant white cards with gold lettering, the Hope Foundation annual Thanksgiving benefit. Emily glanced at the sign, a small smile curving her lips. The foundation's name wasn't a coincidence. It carried the same name as her son Hope, the child who had changed everything. Richard appeared beside her, dressed in a classic black tuxedo, his calm presence as steady as ever. "You did it," he said softly. "Look at this room." She laughed gently. "We did it. I just gave it a heartbeat." He studied her for a long moment, pride clear in his eyes. "You've come so far, Emily. Sometimes I forget how much can change in a single year." She turned toward the stage, where a slideshow of success stories played on the giant screen. Women who'd rebuilt their businesses, returned to school, started again after heartbreak. "A lot can change," she said quietly. "You just have to stop letting pain define you." Before she could say more, a hush spread through the crowd. The doorman at the far end of the room had just announced a new arrival. Daniel Miller stepped in. The sound of his name whispered through the guests like a ripple. He looked smaller somehow, less polished, his confidence muted. The scandal had faded, but not forgiven. His company was gone, his money tied up in lawsuits. Tonight, he wasn't a guest of honor. He was a man seeking closure. For a long moment, he stood at the edge of the ballroom, eyes fixed on Emily. Then, hesitantly, he approached. "Emily," he said quietly when he reached her. She turned, composed. "Daniel." He swallowed hard. "You look incredible. And this," he gestured at the glittering event around them. "You built all this?" "With help," she said simply, "and a lot of lessons." He nodded, shame flickering across his face. "I came tonight to say I'm sorry for everything. You didn't deserve what I did to you." She studied him for a moment, then smiled, not bitterly, but gently. "You're right, I didn't, but if it hadn't happened, I wouldn't be here. So in a strange way, thank you." Daniel's throat tightened. "I don't expect forgiveness." "You already have it," she said. "I forgave you a long time ago. That's how I got free." He nodded slowly, eyes glistening, then stepped back. "You're remarkable, Emily, truly." As he turned to leave, Richard approached, placing a steady hand on her back. "You okay?" he asked quietly. She exhaled softly, "Better than okay." Later that night, Emily took the stage to close the evening. She looked out at the hundreds of faces, her voice steady and warm. "Pain doesn't define us," she said. "What we build after it does. A year ago, I thought I'd lost everything. But sometimes, losing what breaks you is how you make space for what saves you." The room erupted in applause, and as Richard took her hand under the golden light, the camera flash caught the perfect moment. The once broken woman, now standing tall, radiant, powerful. In that single frame, Emily Carter's story came full circle. The girl he left behind had become the woman who no longer looked back. So that's it. Our story has come full circle. Emily's journey wasn't just about revenge or success. It was about healing, self-worth, and learning that peace is the ultimate victory. You know, my friends, if you're still here with me right now, maybe something in this story touched you too. Maybe you've been through your own heartbreak, your own version of starting over. Remember what Marcus Aurelius once said, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." Pain doesn't define us, what we build after it does. Emily chose forgiveness, dignity, and inner strength, and in doing so, she became free. That's something all of us can do. To stop chasing closure from others and start creating it within ourselves. So tonight, if you're holding on to something heavy, take a breath. You're not broken, you're becoming. If this story moved you, give it a like. Share it with someone who might need a reminder that healing is possible. And don't forget to subscribe. Because on this channel, we don't just tell stories, we grow together. one comeback at a time.